This is absolutely amazing.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Eva Chipiuk. I am one of the lawyers representing Freedom Corp and the protesters who were here in Ottawa in January and February 2022. Mr. Commissioner, friends, Canadians listening to this public inquiry into the government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act for the first time in history. You will remember on the first day of this public inquiry, our lead counsel, Brendan Miller, in his opening statement spoke about the evidence and threshold required for invoking the Emergencies Act. Mr. Miller set out each element of the test for invoking the Emergencies Act and then predicted that there would be no evidence to support any of the factors required to invoke the Act. I would like to restate Mr. Miller's opening statement and add to it what evidence in fact came out. It is our view that there was no justification whatsoever to invoke the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act requires several things. One, it could be invoked due to espionage and sabotage. Did you hear any evidence about espionage and sabotage? The answer is no. Two, it could be invoked on the basis of clandestine or deceptive foreign influence, or foreign influence that involves the threat to a person. Did you hear evidence about that? The answer is no. It also could be invoked on the basis of threats or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. Did you hear evidence of violence against persons or property? The answer is no. Lastly, it can also be invoked if there is a group or persons trying to destroy or overthrow by violence the system of government of Canada. Did you hear evidence about individuals trying to do that? The answer is no. And the answer is there was no reasonable and probable grounds to invoke the Emergencies Act, and the government exceeded their jurisdiction both constitutionally and legislatively in doing so. In using the Emergencies Act, which gives the government with extraordinary powers, the government of Canada chose use of force, that is state violence, over peaceful negotiations and democratic engagement with the Canadian people. The sad irony is that the protest in Ottawa was fundamentally about government overreach. Canadians felt that the current government had gone too far with the COVID-19 mandates. The government's response to the protest by invoking the Emergencies Act was a further reach in power over people instead of power by the people. In response to the unprecedented unison of voices of many Canadians, including a voice by way of millions in donations to the cause, the government of Canada refused to engage and listen to the people. Instead, by invoking the Emergencies Act, the government stepped even further into their oppressive governments by quashing the most fundamental right that belongs to a Canadian democracy. That is to come together in their nation's capital, in front of Parliament, to engage in dialogue with their elected officials.
Yeah, go figure.
Protesting is, in fact, the people trying to have a dialogue with their government as a last resort of engagement when all other avenues for discourse have failed or have been censored. A healthy democracy demands continuous engagement between people and government. And when the government uses violence to assert its power over the people, the fabric of democracy is torn. That is what was witnessed at the protest. We heard from witness and protester Maggie Byrne, who knelt before the public order units, placed a copy of the Canadian Bill of Rights, the first human rights law in Canada, onto the snow in front of her before being brutally snatched and shoved behind the police lines, thrown to the frozen ground, beaten, and had a rifle pointed to her head.
Oh my God.
We heard from witness and veteran Chris Deering,
Yeah, my
survivor of a bomb explosion in Afghanistan.
Yep.
He fought for our country because he believed that our Canadian values were worth fighting for. He said he came to Ottawa because it was his duty to support the protesters in their cry to the Canadian government that enough is enough. They've gone too far with interfering with our right to freedom, our right to live in a safe country, free from fear. In response to our dear veterans' bravery, moral courage, and sacrifice for this country, he was brutally beaten by the police and treated with less human dignity than a prisoner of war. The fact is, it does not matter which side of the protest you are on. To be Canadian is to value human dignity, kindness, community, compassion, and love. It is not normal to hate and divide. This public inquiry is more than just looking into circumstances that led to the government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. It is the beginning of a journey of rediscovering of what it means to be Canadian. The government does not define us, we do. We, the collective of many diverse groups across the country. The protest in Ottawa brought so many Canadians from all different walks of life together. It was an opportunity for reconciliation, for uniting and forging friendships despite so many differences. The protest in Ottawa gave people hope, and it humbled all of us.
Yep.
What we saw in Ottawa is emblematic of what it means to be Canadian.
Yep.
And that is what terrifies the current government of Canada. Yes, there was honking and diesel and noise, and that was not only challenging for residents in Ottawa, but also for protesters. But the protesters were not extremists or terrorists. They are fellow Canadians, neighbors, and each person is the thread that holds us together in a peaceful and loving society. We have all suffered in our own unique way because of the pandemic, the virus, the sickness, the lockdowns, the job losses, loss of livelihood, the mandates, and mental health. On the first day of this public order emergency inquiry, Commissioner Rouleau, you said uncovering the truth is an important goal. When difficult events occurred that impact the lives of Canadians, the public has the right to know what happened. Certes, l'objectif de l'enquête publique.
So the goal of this public inquiry is to shed a light on the situation which occurred and to make recommendations so that this situation will not occur again.
Let this inquiry be the starting point for all Canadians. And that means all Canadians, including government leaders, to hold the executive branch of Canada to account. If there ever was a time for a Prime Minister to step down, now is that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Amen.
Next is the Ottawa Coalition, please.
Amen, girl.